workshop for September 14th. This time, Jenny, if you take the roll.
Councilmember Thorson?
Here.
Councilmember Peterson? Councilmember Wong? Here. Councilmember Cole?
Here.
Mayor Furlong?
Here. Quorum is present. Motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councilmember Peterson,
Second.
second by Councilmember Cole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the motion carries. We just one topic tonight, and that's the budget, 2022 budget, and just a continuation of our previous discussion, and I'll turn it over to Interim City Manager Frandl.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We're just going to, like you said, pick up where we left off before, and I'm just going to turn it right over to Dan.
Welcome, Dan.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, council members. We're on about the 5-yard line and just about to go in for a touchdown. So we're closing in on finishing up the general fund budget, the Economic Development Authority budget, and the HRA budget. In our last workshop, it was the desire of the council to bring in the department heads, and we had a few discussion items that were still outstanding that they could address. In addition to that, I think the city council wanted to hear from them of where they felt that the 2022 budget was at, were they comfortable with it, and then looking kind of down the road, long range, if there were thoughts of additional staff that they would have needs for, especially with the redevelopment activity that's happening in the city. Kind of a reminder for next Tuesday, we will be certifying the maximum levies. We will also be having the T&T meeting date, a part of that resolution, which we've chosen to be December 7th. At the regular city council meeting. There will also be the adoption of the 2022 CIP plan, and there will be an item to do a 2022 street and utility improvement project feasibility study, and there will also be an item to authorize the sale of refunding bonds. So we've got a lot of items that that'll be coming forth that are already, except for one, which is good news that I'll share here in a moment, part of our discussion. They have been incorporated within the budget that I have today, and so I'm just pending on the discussion today to finalize the budget up, and I will have a final budget document story that'll be on OpenGov as a part of the approval of the certifying of the maximum levy. And again, we'll be certifying the maximum levy in December 21st of this year. We'll actually approve the final levy, so we can actually go down. We just cannot go up. So with that, I'll kind of show where we kind of left off. And there it is. So on December 7th, we showed where the levy was, proposed levy was at approximately $5.7 million, $256,000 difference, about a 4.7% increase. Some of the changes that we had discussed in our previous workshop last week, that there was a recommendation to have an additional 0.5% to the COLA. I have made that. To remove the council member Thurston's pay, which we will need to have resolution on that at a future date. I adjusted the city manager compensation. I had put in a little bit more than is absolutely necessary based upon the new posting for the position. I adjusted the police chief compensation. The budget had the prior police chief, so I based it upon our current police chief. And then when we promoted the public works director, I had it in the budget a step higher, so I adjusted that compensation for that. And then we had the fire overtime, which was reduced. I removed the taxes. All of those changes, I was able to net to have no levy impact. So all those changes are now in the budget, and we're still at 4.7. So now comes the fun part. Good news, got some really good news. That refunding bond that we will, that the city council will approve next week will result in approximately a $55,000 decrease in the debt service levy, which is approximately a 1% decrease in our levy request. So that's the first item that you'll see up there. So that change drops our our levy right now at that point with that step to a 3.7. The rest of the items are up for discussion. I'll quickly go through them. If you remember, there was a $25,000 increase for the downtown beautification. If we were to remove that, that would be approximately a 0.5% reduction. There was discussion about increasing the mayor and council members' pay. From our discussion, my recommendation would be to increase the mayor and the council members' pay $500. It would bring it up to, for the mayor, $6,900, and for each council member, $5,700. That change would have an impact of $2,180, including appropriate payroll taxes. Another item to discuss tonight is adding back the fire and code enforcement part-time wages. That would be approximately $18,700 add to the budget. And then last week, interim city manager Frandl had brought up the change of a community development position from a part-time to a full-time. If we were to do that, that would be an approximately $30,000 increase. And then the new police chief is seeing a need for adding a police sergeant. So he has 24/7 coverage of supervision. And we kind of have two different scenarios that are really additive. One is that if we were to make that position effective June 1st of 2022, that it would have approximately an $81,000 impact. If we were to have it effective at the first of the year, it would be an additional $57,000, bringing the total up to approximately $138,000. If we were to say that we were going to approve all of these changes, the reductions and the additions, it would bring our levy up to, we'd be certifying a maximum levy on the general fund of approximately 6.7%. So with that, we'll go back to the removal of downtown beautification and turn it over to City Council for any discussion or questions.
Okay, so the question of the council is, do we want to keep the $25,000 beautification in there, or do we take it out? Let me clarify, does that $25,000, I know that the money that was allocated, I believe from TIF for the downtown, is that money gone now? Are we able to use any of that money for downtown beautification?
So, Mayor, the items that you want to do for the beautification component to it, TIF has a number of restrictions on the use of those funds. It's going to be highly unlikely that all of those items will qualify underneath the TIF funding that's available. There is money available still that's left. The project isn't totally complete, so we haven't closed that out. But the plan that finance has come up with is that we start to pay off that TIF debt in 2022. There's approximately a $92,000 principal and interest payment that's due from the general fund. My recommendation, because it's a qualifying activity, is to have the remaining money that's in that TIF pay for that debt in 2022. And then in the CIP plan, what I've done is I've adjusted it to then increase that funding source to be that $92,000 that could be utilized for some of the beautification things that you want to do down in the downtown area. Another addition that needs to be pointed out is that the TIF district, those funds can only be used in that TIF district, which won't allow you, to cover the whole entire downtown area. This way, it actually frees the funds up to be utilized for the downtown. That's part of the reason why I've kind of made the recommendation of removing the $25,000, is because you'll have that $98,000. And then there's an additional $50,000 that's already in there. That's part of the CIP to be approved, so you would actually have approximately $142,000 that would be available in 2022 for the downtown.
For the downtown
Correct.
beautification or
Yep.
whatever we need
Yep.
to use it for.
Yep.
How much was it? 100 and?
About 142.
Okay, so the question is the $25,000 is being recommended from the finance director to remove that, and that would give us $142,000 potentially for beautification.
Correct.
For downtown. Turn it over to council, see what you think.
Sounds like a no-brainer, because I didn't want to lose that money, but we believe in beautification of that. Those are the tables and all that other.
No,
All that is in the new
I think that's another discussion that we would have.
But it would just be, just to keep
Well, there's nothing down there right now, so
Well, I
all we
know.
have is mulch.
the, no,
We need trees and
So it's for
flowers and
landscaping?
landscaping.
Okay.
yeah, because it looks awesome up on the hill. I really love that look. So if we continue that all the way
Right,
east, it'll be good.
right. And I don't know if 142, I don't know if we have an estimate of what it would cost. I don't know if, Ryan, if you know what that number was, or,
In the old, or in the original bid for the downtown, the numbers that I saw was about $150,000 for that. Now, I don't know if that included the labor involved to do that. I think it did to install those or put those in, but I would have to imagine that we could definitely do what we need to do down there for that kind of money.
have an impact on.
Yeah. We still have to get irrigation installed downtown. If, we're gonna have all those plants down there. I think we're still working with a contractor on getting some, Brian, I don't know if getting some, pipes bored in so we can get the irrigation to each one of those planters that we need. But I would imagine that $142,000, we should be able to do what we need to do down there.
Can we put plants on the lamppost too, all the way down?
We can, we'd have to have someone water them every day or get irrigation up to those posts, but I don't even know if those posts we could hang a plant off those or not. Brian would probably tell me no, but, but yeah. So I think we should be able to do something for that kind of money.
Good. Councilmember Wine?
Yeah, so in terms of the seating ideas and plans, that comes out of a different fund, or can someone help me understand that?
Say again.
The tables and chairs, the seating, is that looking at a different fund then, or?
I think we need further discussion with that. There's a lot of sides to that on whether the city should be funding something like that. I know it was brought up in the past. I think once you open that door, you need to look at more than just the bars. If you're going to do that for those businesses, you might have to look at others. There was the possibility of talking about storage of those. I think this is a really big discussion to have before moving forward with that.
So we actually had a meeting with all the bar owners related not only to that, but that discussion was come up. And I believe that at one of business association or whatever, it was mentioned that potentially, it wasn't promised or anything, that, the city would look into maybe purchasing tables, that they're all the same type of material and same color and all that. But what City Manager Crandall's saying is that, potentially it could be a maintenance problem for us. I mean, we would have to store all that at the end of the year during the winter and that type of stuff. So maybe it's more of a design or maybe a standard that we would come up with as a council to determine, what each bar owner could put out on the patio, more of a standard so they're all kind of similar in with each other. And that's a discussion that I think we would have to have if we want to have that be part of, if you want this money to be part of the fixtures for down there, for tables and chairs. I think, my thinking is that this money should be for plantings and trees and maybe benches, city benches that we would have, and not outside the bars, and be more of a standard.
Sure, yeah, I
A
just
communication to the bar owners that the standard, this is what we would like to see out there, and they were happy with that.
Sure, yeah, I just was trying to understand because there was some conversation about that previously, so I
Right.
just wanted to clarify where we were. But I would welcome, this topic at another council or, workshop or something. I think there are a few different models that we can collaborate with the business association on that wouldn't be complete financial or responsibility or obligation falling completely on the city, but could also be shared with the city or with our business partners. Okay.
Councilmember Thorson?
Yeah, well, and just to go along with that conversation, I think just as far as us saying, hey, you can put tables and chairs out there, that's an improvement from before. I understand there's concerns over aesthetics and whatnot, but I would give the benefit of the doubt to the businesses that they would see that as an opportunity, as an extension of their business, and they would want to have, something that's decent looking and durable. I know right now what's out there, I think everything's just temporary because everyone's kind of waiting for a decision from the city on what's going on. If we're going to buy something and we're going to maintain it, if we're going to provide funding and then they maintain it, or if it's just all on their end, which is what I would support, because you do avoid that perception of giving certain businesses special treatment versus others. So I don't see why we can't maybe have some sort of standards to say, let's shy away from the plastic lawn furniture. But again, if that's what a business seems to satisfy their needs, I don't see why we can't say they can't do that. But I get, we have design standards for signage and facade materials and whatnot. So, I'd be open to having that conversation, but I think the less city involvement, the better, and just giving the benefit of the doubt to those businesses would be the best route to take. I had a question just about the downtown project and why, I get this question a lot, what's with the empty planters? Why is there just mulch there? And I was under the understanding that this project included landscaping. So what has changed? Why was that pulled out? Did we recognize any savings for that, or what, what's the answer to that question? Why do we just have mulch beds there right now?
From what I was told is that the plantings were taken out of the project early on to save money, to get the project to hit a certain budget number. I was not involved with that back when, they were deciding that, or, that was decided. That's just what I was told when it came time to, when we were thinking about, well, okay, when they're gonna start planting this stuff, when's that gonna happen? And then I was told, a month and a half, 2 months ago, that was pulled out. So, okay, that's all I know about that as far as.
And I believe the mulch is in there only because to fill the holes and
The mulch,
car show and,
we rushed to put the mulch in before the first car show to try to take the trip hazards out of, that being, with that just being dirt or people, stepping in there just to clean it up. That's doing it backwards. All the mulch will have to be removed to, do the plantings. you know, especially the number of the plantings. The plan that I saw for the planting, there was thousands of plants that are going in down there. So, like I said, that budget number, where that is, you know, we'll probably have to relook at that, redesign what we want down there or what we want, you know, to be. There's gonna be a lot of salt that goes in those, you know, with how we salt the sidewalks and, you know, whatnot through the winter, but that is what I was told, and that was gonna be decided later. And I don't know if that's true, but that's what I heard.
And then irrigation was discussed, and that obviously is an additional cost. It's something that we don't currently have. And if you recall, or you can see what existing plantings and trees are down there, that we do not have irrigation, correct?
We do not.
So this idea that we have to have irrigation for anything to grow just simply isn't true. I understand the benefits of irrigation and how certain plantings rely on that. But, you know, if we're looking at, you know, what types of plants are we looking at putting in there and why, I guess, is my question. And that if it's plantings that require irrigation, why are we going that route, you know, versus something that's just low maintenance, hardier plants, stuff that's already down there that we've seen, that, you know, perennial stuff that's can sustain itself on whatever irrigation that gets naturally, and then it can withstand the salt and whatever. So I guess I question the need for that, especially now after the concrete's been poured. I mean, I understand they can bore, you know, to put those lines in, but then there's concern that, you know, we haven't had irrigation in the past. If maintenance isn't properly done and we have lines that are blown, do we just continue to bore, or do you have to tear up concrete? You know, so these are such a things that, you know, I understand the desire to have things that are, you know, maybe a little more expensive and nicer, and to have that, we need to incur additional expenses. But I think oftentimes when we make these decisions, we overlook the maintenance items, and down the road, these unforeseen things that can happen if we don't stay on top of things, like every year, we got to hire someone to come blow out all those lines, or we would do it ourselves, I would imagine. I don't know if we contract that out or not, but, so I guess I would, if we're going to move forward, excuse me, with something, I would like to see some options, you know, like, hey, here's, you know, we've established that we can plant trees and flowers and whatnot without irrigation, because they've been growing downtown for decades. What does that look like? And then here's option B, the more expensive route, and, you know, maybe have some sort of direction on, or option for the council to consider on that. And then you know, we discussed the plants on the light poles, and I was, you know, down in the Bayport area a couple weeks ago and saw that they had some really nice plants, but some of them were fake. And, you know, then you get rid of that.
No.
You get rid of the whole need to irrigate. It's hard to tell. I mean, have we looked at that? I mean, obviously, then you have storage issues, but, you know, does it make sense to do things like that? You know, I don't know. I don't know what fake plants cost, but I couldn't tell the difference. But
I grow those the best.
well, yeah, you know. So I don't know if that's, you know, been in the discussion or not, but I think it's something to look into, like, you know, especially if we're looking at buying. I know I had an opportunity to talk to the owner of Saks, and they've done a kind of a beautiful job over there in Vadnais Heights with their additional outdoor storage and all those plants and flowers. And he shared with us the cost, and it's kind of shocking. And it's all just one-time expense, and then at the end, he's got to toss it all and then redo it again next year. So, I mean, if we can avoid that, maybe it's a little more expensive up front to buy fake-looking stuff, but if it's hardy and lasts and, you know, can save money in the long run and achieve the accomplished goal of beautification of downtown, I don't see why we wouldn't consider that as an option.
Yep, just so you're aware, the plantings on 7th Avenue that Councilmember Peterson was referring to, that's all irrigated up there.
Yeah, the new stuff,
Yep,
yeah.
all the new
I
stuff
get
up there is all irrigated. So if we wanted to I can't speak intelligently about what plants do what. I mean, if it were up to me, I'd put hostas and daylilies because you can't kill them, but
Sunflowers.
yeah, sunflower, that's all I don't really know what, is resistant to all that, but that stuff that's all planted on 7th Avenue, that had to be irrigated and to keep those things alive. Now, I don't know how that's gonna, how much, moving on, the years going down the road, how that stuff's gonna regrow and what it's gonna look like in 3-4 years. But the contractor that put those in, we were on the phone with him weekly. He was checking, how much water was in the soil. He was asking us, to adjust the times, because it was in a drought year. I mean, there was a lot of time and effort spent with the irrigation of all that. So, if we were doing that downtown, yeah, it's a lot of extra work. It's a lot of extra hassle. I have not had any discussions about what we want in there, what sorts of stuff, and we can definitely get some stuff like that put together. I was just kind of waiting for some direction, or, now that we hear that there's some budgeted money for that, we can definitely look at those types of options.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, I would welcome, maybe some pollinator-friendly, plants. That's something that the city has kind of advertised as kind of a direction they're going, is more pollinator-friendly plants that can also be, perennials that come back every year, a little bit more low maintenance. Yeah, I would agree.
I know that, I think initially when they did all the plantings downtown, I know Sue Springborn was down there watering all the time. So anytime you got new plants, it needs water, so we would have to have some sort of water source if we were to do any, live plants. Councilmember Cole, anything?
I think the question at hand was the removal of the beautification, $25,000 as opposed to talking about irrigation and what we were going to plant. So if we do truly have the $142,000 available for the continuation of the project, and Ron, you're comfortable with that, I'm fine with with the $25,000 being absorbed back into the budget from a reduction standpoint. If you feel you need additional, I guess tonight would be the night to talk about it. So I kind of turn it back over to you, but what I heard from you, you're comfortable with it, so I'm good with letting the $25K go back.
Yeah, I think we'd be okay.
Councilmember Peterson?
I already said, I agree with that.
Keeping the 20 or
No.
taking it out?
Taking it out.
Taking it out.
Said that right away.
Councilmember Wine?
Yeah, I think that would be okay if Ron sees that he can work with the budget as is.
Councilmember Thorson? Take her out.
It's gone. See how he is? The next item for discussion is the increase of the mayor and the council members' pay. What I have here is a suggestion to increase the pay by $500 to bring it up to $6,900 for the mayor and $5,700 for council members. If you remember last week, for cities that are in the metro area that are of same type of population that the city of North St. Paul is at, their mayor is at, I think it was 7,500, and the council members were at about 6,750. So this is kind of moving in that direction. I think part of what we heard from the city council is let's not make this big quantum leap all at once. Let's kind of look at kind of incremental steps as we move forward. And so I'm suggesting, and it's open for discussion, I'm suggesting increasing $500.
Okay. So discussion is for the increase in pay of $500 for council and the mayor. Again, I think that would be below the average of what lake cities were like.
Yes, the lake cities were, instead of the 69, we're at 7,500 for a mayor. For the city council, instead of 5,700, they were at 6,750.
Okay.
So yes, it's still below.
Okay, I'll start to my left here, Councilmember Cole.
I don't think there's any of us up here that are doing this for the money. Dan, the point that you brought out was the disparity between where North St. Paul is and where the other communities are. And at some point, I think the city's going to need to start to get that gap back to Mayor's point. Baby steps, a little here, a little there, but I wouldn't, I think we, again, identified a 30% gap currently. I don't support a 30% swing, but if it's a couple $100 here, $500 there, just to keep the gap moving, that's fine.
Councilmember Wong.
Yeah, I think an incremental approach is just fine.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's fair, and it's not a money grab, and I think that's the way we should proceed.
Councilmember Thorson.
I'm a hard no on that one.
Okay.
But it's irrelevant because I'm not going to get paid, so.
So let's go ahead with the 500.
And it's an every 2 year, it's an every 2 year thing. So whatever we agree to won't take place until 2022, and then that is locked till the next election cycle of 2024, correct? Do I understand that correctly?
Councilmember Cole, my understanding is, this action what you're deciding today will actually put it into the budget. We still would need to have an actual action that comes in front of the city council for approval to increase that rate. But I don't believe you're restricted to just on election years or non-election years. That was a suggestion that one of the council members had talked about as a methodology, which still can be discussed and looked at into the future. So.
Turn it back to you.
Okay, the next item that we have is to add back in the fire and code enforcement budget part-time wages in the amount of $18,700. What was done here is that on the initial duty on weekends, the budget had in there for 3 individuals to be on site for 12 hours. This reduction reduced that from those 3 individuals from 12 hours to 8 hours. I'd like to give the opportunity for our fire chief to talk a little bit about that need that is there and why that was established.
Fire Chief Manager, welcome.
Hi, Mayor. Hi, Council. Thanks for having us. Getting to what we're talking about here with the initial duty crew on the weekends. Going back to, I'll say, 2018, when we had the study completed and we identified some issues and concerns with staffing as it relates to responding to calls. We definitely identified, as had been before that and at that time, issues on the weekends with staffing part-time, paid-on-call people and having a response on the weekends, definitely during the daytime, as most people have, families and other obligations going on. So it became increasingly difficult to make sure that we had adequate response for fire and EMS. It was previously planned to really do more in 2020 with this initial duty crew and staffing, but because of COVID, we decided to put it off, and January 1st of this year is when we implemented just for Saturdays and Sundays from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., a 3-person duty crew that's here in the station that handles response to the majority of the calls, which are all EMS calls, and then fire calls related to fire alarms, vehicle fire, something that a 3-person crew can initially handle And if something larger came in, such as a structure fire, it would tone out the rest of the department to be able to respond and to assist. Additionally, with the three-person duty crew, myself and our assistant chiefs that are not scheduled on the weekends, we would typically make sure one of us would be around to respond with that crew as well for whatever it would be. So if something came in that wasn't a confirmed structure fire, that crew would be able to handle. But additionally, if it was something like that, that crew would also be able to respond as a three-person crew immediately and to start hammering things out depending on the call. So that's part of the piece we have in place for handling the weekends. And like I say, we started in January. And typically the way it works is I have a schedule and I ask for the firefighters to submit their times to be a part of this. I don't make everybody do it because not everybody wants to do it. We have members that are also a part of our EMS on duty crew from home program, and the same for that. We have members that prefer to do that to be able to respond from home instead of being here at the station. What I have seen from both of these methods that we're tackling everything on the weekends and throughout the week is that it's allowing a way for individuals to find what works best from them. It's giving them options, and it's filling a space and a void for us as well, as far as making sure that I have somebody around. Besides just having them around for calls, each week for each crew that's already signed up, I specifically give them tasks and duties to perform besides responding to calls, whether it be maintenance on our trucks during the winter. For instance, they would be going out to our lock boxes, and when they were frozen up, checking those, doing pre-plans. So I find things and tasks for them to do in between the calls. They also are given training programs along the fire and EMS side to do as well, to keep up their skills. And myself and the chief officers have found that those people that continue to do the initial duty crews are becoming more proficient as firefighters and with their EMS skills, as do the ones who do the EMS duty shifts from home. So in my professional opinion and how things are going, it's giving us options to be able to fill the gaps that we had before to basically meet, community expectations, of when you call 911, the expectation is that you're going to have a very quick response in between the fire and police and EMS. I think we have a positive, reinforcement of that. So if you have questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer any.
Any questions for Chief Mallinger?
Yeah, I do.
Member Thorson?
I don't know, just maybe for the benefit of the two new council members, they may not be familiar with the history of this program. I don't know if maybe you want to talk about that briefly, but just for clarification, when you're referencing the 2018 public safety study and how they made recommendations on how to fill the staffing shortages, that's in regards to the first responder program, correct?
That is one piece of it, correct, yes.
And that first responder program is a program that we established back in 2008 and have chosen to run as a supplemental service type to provide emergency service along with Lakeview Ambulance.
Did you say 2008 or 18?
2008.
8, okay.
Yeah, back even prior to that, I would say, when Highway 36 was under construction, 2007.
Okay,
probably.
that's-
But yes, correct.
2007. So maybe just for the benefit of the new council members and maybe some of us who may have forgotten, maybe do you want to walk back through how this program originated and how it is running today?
Yeah. So, like Councilmember Thorson stated, the origination of the EMS on duty program came to fruition during the time of when Highway 36 was being reconstruction, and basically our north-south routes from the station were being cut off. And our concern at that time was how were we going to adequately respond to medicals directly, that basically we could see 2 blocks away from the fire station, but we weren't able to get there very quickly. So at that time, the department implemented the EMS on duty shift from home, where we have a firefighter, a first responder, that basically checks out a squad, which is an SUV or a pickup truck that has the necessary medical equipment, AED and all that equipment to respond to medicals to help be that first responder at the time. So we found out during that time very quickly on, as we had initially even cardiac arrests where we had first responders on scene, and I think it was on 13th Avenue near Margaret at that time that we had a first responder on scene, taking the necessary steps, and it just continued to help and provide that coverage while we were being cut off during the project. So once the project obviously was over and we still had, the new road going through, because we felt it was being effective, we continued on with the EMS duty shift from home. Yeah. Did that answer your question, Scott? Yeah.
So the initial need for this was the town was split, and we wanted to ensure that we would have adequate response times to emergencies that were on the north end of 36 to where, at that point, it was either going up to 120 or going down to McKnight to cross.
Correct.
And initially, the individuals that signed up for them, from my recollection, were 3 individuals, and they all lived on that north side of town.
There were, yeah.
Okay. And then the way that the program was being run was, it was inconsistent. They would all sign up, they would all respond in their own personal vehicles, but they'd have a call where potentially all 3 of them would show up, and maybe another call where none of them would show up. Correct?
Possibly.
Okay.
So that's not how it operates now.
Yeah, and so that's why it morphed into, we needed a more structured
Sure.
response.
Yeah.
Where you have this shift where it opens up to the whole entire department too after the construction was done. And it was opened up to have 1 or 2 individuals sign up. And then it has progressed into we want 2 people signed up to fill those total shift hours. And I don't recall what the total is, but the point I'm getting to is here, what is this cost to the city and what's the benefit? Before, the need was, we have concerns over response due to the construction that's divided the town. Now that that's not here, and I get your points to where it's beneficial to the responders and they're getting more patient contacts. In theory, there could be times where they are the first ones on scene. And I think no one will argue that the best, most advantageous delivery of services would be to have a full-time fire department. But we simply can't afford that. We're a small city, we have limited resources.
And I agree with that. I'm definitely not moving in the
Yeah.
direction of a full-time fire department.
So this program, to me, it seems like initially there was a need for it, but now, because if this program went away, what would happen if someone calls 911?
Well, so I still believe in the program in the sense of our response as first responders. There's been a big change in the EMS world, generally speaking. So we contract out through Lakeview EMS that is here in the station, right? So 24/7, we have them here in the station. But they're not 100% guaranteed to North St. Paul. They're just here, we provide them space, they're our provider. Their call load over the last year has gone up 30%. They have taken on more on the, I guess what would be the west side of Wisconsin into Hudson area, adding 2 ambulances into that area. So their coverage area has grown, and they are also a part of Alina for dispatching. On one day, about a month ago, I counted the truck leaving our station 13 times, not for our calls, but for other departments' calls, whether it's going further west into Roseville, Vadnais Heights, or Shoreview, or Little Canada, even Maplewood.
How far do they go?
They go where they're needed. And I'll rephrase that, and typically they will stay within Ramsey County area. But EMS in general, not just Lakeview, but all EMS in general are seeing an increased volume of calls. They do provide, Lakeview does provide a lot of response for Maplewood that has 3 full-time ambulances 24/7. There are times that they're going. What I'm getting at is even though they're here for us 24/7, they're not always here for us 24/7. And the first responders provide a guarantee that we're always going to have a basic EMS response within that adequate time frame. And even when within the last couple of weeks, we've had an extremely difficult time with, we've had 5 cardiac arrests. And unfortunately, on all of those patients passed away. And it's difficult for me to deal with that and our crews and our ambulance people, but I can guarantee them and the families that we gave them the best possible chance and outcome because we had first responders on scene that were doing CPR before EMS was on scene. And I know that's an extreme event, and I'm not trying to showcase it by that, but we spend a lot of time trying to do the best that we can, and I know our responders that are part of it feel that way. And sometimes we have calls that come out, and I was just on one this past weekend where it comes out coded as an Alpha Bravo type medical call for a bleeding. And what that means, it's not a code 3 response for us. It's, hey, somebody's bleeding, but if you can ensure, it's all based on the information that the 911 caller gives. So at the time I was here at the station, and I told them that I would go along with the ambulance, and we responded there, and we got there, and it was quite something different. And I know hadn't we had a first responder or Lakeview there immediately with the amount of blood loss, to be quite blunt about it, if somebody hadn't been there within minutes, it would have been a different story for this gentleman. What I'm getting at is I know it's a cost I understand that, and I'm trying to do the best that I can for the services of the city by providing them with a response that when they call 911, they know they're going to have somebody there. Because for us, you don't see it, but when we show up and they're on the phone with 911, and they're more than grateful to see, doesn't matter if it's, us and fire or EMS, there in a timely manner to help deal with their situation.
Okay, so, my question was, what happens if we were to get with a first responder program, who shows up? Obviously, we contract with Lakeview. Like you said, they have 2 paramedics staffed here 24/7. There's an understanding that on some occasions, given their coverage area and their contracted cities, they may move an ambulance out of here, and then potentially there's no one in the immediate border of the city to respond. Do you have any statistical numbers that can show how often that has happened and how often that is happening, year to date, and then maybe in 2020 and in 2019? Because I know that was discussed in 2018, and I could have swore it was pretty low, under 10 instances or occurrences. And, well, I'll just start with that. Do you have that information available for us, or no?
No, not at this time. I can gather that information. We don't, when we keep track of response times, it's specific to our units and CAD, because we contract through Ramsey County Dispatch, and Lakeview is not a part of that. So their CAD system and the tracking of what units are on scene, they're separate from us. So when I go to our program, it'll pull out any fire units, whether it's a chief officer response or EMS response from our first responders or fire truck. But it doesn't put in Lakeview, it doesn't put in those into ours. So I would have to request that information from Lakeview to get it from their system or a line of dispatching.
So we can get that information?
I would say yes.
And specifically, the question there is, how frequently have we had a medical emergency, no matter what the severity, has Lakeview not responded in an appropriate time versus us getting there first and then being the first patient? Do you understand the question I'm asking? That's what I'm looking for. Not
Yes.
like, well, here's an instance where Lakeview showed up at 32 seconds and we were there at 30. I would think that assumption would be they're here in the city. It would be, how many times have they been outside the city unable to respond? Because I think, what you're getting at is if this is frequently happening and our response is delayed, then maybe we should be looking at our own ambulance service versus continuing to contract with Lakeview. But maybe that's not an issue.
Well, I will say, again, I believe Lakeview, it offers us a great service. I know other departments that have other contractual agreements through other emergency services, and when Lakeview comes into their city, they're glad to see them, and they do a great job, and I think that says something about them. Unfortunately, we have been seeing them more and more respond to other calls outside our city, and it takes time for that backup truck to get from Stillwater to here, or we're having multiple calls within a short time frame. There are definitely changes that are happening in the EMS world, and like I say, I think one of the biggest things that help us provide the continuance of service is the EMS first responders. There's no doubt. And I guess it really comes down to, what type of of service we want to continue to provide.
Are you monitoring and evaluating your response times, both, just general response to station for, like, say, an all-call type of thing, if there is a heart attack, versus response times of the first responders?
Yeah, so for our first responders, immediately from home, we're continue to average that response time from the time the call comes out to arrival on scene, anywhere from 4.5 minutes to 6.5 minutes, so dependent on where they're at in the location. Typically, for our truck, for personnel to respond to the station and get to the truck typically rolls out between that 6 and 8 minute mark, dependent on staff if we have people that are around. Because again, when it's a call like that and we don't have people scheduled, right? So the EMS, we have people scheduled, we're guaranteeing them, versus we're hoping that we have staff around that will backfill the station and respond. So we're basically waiting for people to get to the station, get a decent crew, and hopefully get out between that 6 and 8 minute mark. Sometimes it could be quicker. Sometimes it can be longer, obviously, dependent on situations.
And is it NFTP?
NFPA.
NFPA,
Fire protection.
what's the standard response time?
Well, for fires, the NFPA has a different standard minimum response time for fires, that you have a crew on scene within 10 minutes. So that you're supposed to have a crew of, I believe, 15 personnel on scene within 10 minutes.
Okay. And then for medical, obviously, I understand the concerns about getting there as quick as possible, but there's no separate standard for medical response.
No, communities, obviously, in outlying areas have different response guidelines just because of the distances some may have to follow. I'm not aware of any specific like NFPA has for fire response, but to be honest, I've never specifically looked into it to find out. It's always been more of a issue for me to know that we're providing a necessary service.
So, but the standard is you respond within 10 minutes, and we're well within that 10-minute standard.
But that's for fire calls, correct? Correct.
Okay. Before the first responder, so pre-2007, how would we respond as for medical calls? And again, I know the answer to the question, but for the benefit of the council and those who may be listening and watching, how did we operate as a department before the first responder program?
So we would tone out the entire department to respond to the station, to then respond to those medical calls. So again, you'd wait for people to come to the station, get a crew, and then leave and head to the emergency. So what we were finding is that the majority of the time, just like in any emergency, whether it's EMS or fire related, you need to get control of it as soon as you can, as soon as possible. So a lot of times in this instance, when a truck full of 6 or 7 people was showing up 8 to 10 minutes later after the call came out, and we didn't need 6 or 7 people to assist the ambulance crew or to assist on it. So a lot of times it was rolling out. Not everybody was being utilized. So that was typical of how we would respond.
So what you're saying is there's instances where prior to this, it was inefficient, whereas we would get, and again, I acknowledge too, it's difficult with the calls. You're only operating off of what the call taker is providing. So a simple sick person can turn out to be a full arrest. But prior to the first responder program, there were certain critical calls where when they would come in, they would automatically tone rescue versus waiting till after the fact and Lakeview showing up or the police showing up on scene, which actually happens quite frequently. They're the first ones to arrive to any call. They would discover, oh, this is a critical nature role rescue. So that adds to that delayed response time, correct?
Correct. It adds to the delayed response time.
And so acknowledging that in theory, with a department of 40 people at fully, is that still the budgeted 40?
Yeah, currently we're at 32.
So you're budgeted to have 40, right now you have 32. Do you recall if we've ever had 40 in the last decade?
Yeah. There was a point in time, 2016, 18, somewhere in there, we had 39.
So it's, I know it's hard but, you know, that's what we're budgeted for and we've just never really gotten to that point. But 32 maybe is a real rough average of how many volunteer members that we have at any.
Yeah, it fluctuates quite a bit because, again, we're dealing with part-time paid-on-call people. We're asking people that they take on a lot more than just a part-time job at Target, and they can get paid more at Target for the position as well. And to have them get up in the middle of the night and respond to calls, plus put their life on the line, so, yeah.
I guess the point is, it's rare that we have a call and all members show up.
Correct.
Very rare. In fact,
Yes.
in all my 10.5 years on, I don't think it has ever happened.
That's correct. The
Other
average,
Other than if we know we're having drill and there's food being served, then usually people show up. But
food will get them every
yeah.
time.
So in theory, we've got a medical call, rescue's toned out, 8 to 10 people show up, they're not needed. If that continues to happen, it can create problems with guys getting burnt out per se to say, I keep coming down here and we're not doing anything. Why am I showing up?
Correct.
Or it's causing budget issues now because we're getting all these unnecessary medical calls, but we're responding the way we have it set up, and that's just the risk you run. In theory, 40 guys could show up.
Yeah,
Not
that's
needed.
that's the difficult thing that I have figuring out our budget with is
So that- yeah.
just trying to average out the response that I have.
And that's where I kind of struggle because that's where it's like conflicting logic to me that, how do we manage these resources? That's at times inefficient. And so is this program here, especially now with having, you have 3 guys or 3 people at the station 12 hours a day, Saturday and Sunday. I mean, in theory, there could be no calls that happen. And previously, those individuals were, signing up and they're at home, they're living their day, that they're just constrained to, you have to be able to respond.
Sorry to interrupt. Surprisingly, I have found that the individuals that are doing these duty shifts here at the station are the ones that did not want to do the EMS duty shifts from home. They like working in the team environment. They don't like being that one person by themselves to make that call. So that's when I was saying before, having options out there with the EMS responder duty shift from home. I have people that like to do that and people that like to do the initial duty shift where they can be with the team and vice versa. Some will crisscross and do both, but separately, I do find that there are others that will only do the initial duty shift because they know they're working with the team.
But the normal shift, there's 2 people signed up, correct? Or is that?
Or the EMS on duty shift from home.
So there's 2 people that are expected to respond together. They're not
Correct.
They're not coming to the station, they're responding from wherever their prospective homes to the same call.
Correct, but again,
Along
I
with
don't make.
Lakeview and
Yep.
whatever police.
I don't make people, like, it's voluntary for them to sign up, so it's often that there could only be one person on that schedule for that EMS duty shift from home, even though I have 2 spots, and I will say the majority of the time it is 2 people, but there are often times, especially on the weekends, if it's overnight, a Friday night, a Saturday night, or a Sunday night, that it's 1 person, just because there are other obligations for whatever reason.
So the 2008 study, they looked at our calls and they determined that of the EMS calls, 8% were critical in nature. I don't know if you want to share what's critical in nature. I think everyone gets that. Has that changed from 2018 till today?
Well, again, I haven't pulled specific numbers on that, other than our call volume from 2018 has increased. In 2018, we had 1,318 calls, and in 2019, it went up to 1,355, and 2020, it went up to 1,478, and we're seeing that increase continue. Right now, we're at the same call volume this time of the year as we were last year, and knowing with the additional housing that we have going on within the city, that potentially that's only going to continue to increase.
In those numbers you just shared, that's a combination of both straight EMS and then fire rescue calls, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So a portion of those calls we'd be responding to regardless. I guess I'm focusing on this medical aspect of it, where this first responder program now has, you know, we're involving ourselves by choice to do this program to respond to all these calls, where if we were running it prior to 2007, in theory, we wouldn't be having, we'd still have the calls, but we're not obligated to respond to them all as we are in the current format with the responder program.
Well, I mean, obligated, I guess, in what sense? That's, I guess, my concern. For me, I feel obligated to respond to these calls. The fire department takes on the EMS training that keeps all of our first responders, our firefighters, up with whether it's EMR or EMT, and do the quarterly refreshers that keep them up to date so that their state certifications are continued. We work very closely with Lakeview EMS, again, in the training aspect, to provide that. I work very hard with trying to find best applications, if technology can be placed within us for providing better service. A couple years ago, we added the rescue pump and the rescue pod for CPR, which it adds a 30% increase in life potential by using it. And it's something that we have taken on and trained in, and including different airway adjuncts, iGel, to help increase that possibility of bringing that life back. So that's when you say obligation, I feel that obligation to the community to do my best and to add these things, and no disrespect to any other service out there, and even our police department that help us quite immensely on cardiac arrest calls as we're able. But we've also been on calls where we've been working the patient and I've needed our police to provide scene security while we're in that situation. And we have to work together as a team, so.
I could clarify. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sorry if that was interpreted like I was trying to say we don't need to be responding to these calls. So let me just provide some context. Prior to Lakeview, we ran our own ambulance service.
Yeah, correct.
And that was a BLS service.
Yep.
Basic life support.
That is correct.
We made the decision to contract with Lakeview because they provided a higher level of service, ALS service, meaning 2 paramedics, whereas before they were fire department members who were trained at potentially the highest level of paramedic. Maybe there were some paramedics at the department at the time. I'm not aware of that. Perhaps there were. But it was essentially first responder level training or EMT as the highest level. That's BLS, anything under paramedic, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we made that decision to change the way we responded in an attempt to deliver advanced life care service to our residents through paramedic trained level individuals responding to medical calls. When did, I don't know when we switched to Lakeview, do you recall?
1997, and additionally, you're correct in what you're saying. Additionally, with the nursing home at the time, that's on Skillman, that's no longer there on the north end of town by Northwood Park. Sorry, drawing a blank on the name of it.
Transitional care, I think it was just called North St. Paul Transitional
Yeah,
Care.
there you go. At that time, we were responding with our BLS ambulance, and we were transporting patients beyond our level of care. And it was becoming multiple. So we had BLS service that was transporting a patient to a hospital that required ALS care. So that was a piece of the reason to switch to ALS as well.
Mm-hmm. And from 97 then till 2007, the department did not respond to every medical call like we do now, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that's what I meant.
Sure, okay.
That we obviously have an obligation to protect and provide service, but prior to the adoption and incorporation of this, we weren't responding to every single medical call.
Correct.
And that's why we have, of these numbers you shared, the 1318 calls, the 1355 in 2019, the 1478, there's ambulance calls and then fire rescue calls. At least that's what I was used to when I was on. There was a deviation between
Yes.
only tones. There's actually separate tones. There's a medical tone and then a fire tone.
Yep. We have tones for medical.
So that's all
fire.
I was just, the fire side, there's
Got
a
it.
different, okay? And, you know, part of this is gonna flow into the police department when they're up, but you talked about the need to have, an immediate response and a quick response. You've also talked about, obviously, we're having more development and more residents. Believe it was back in 2016 when the Polar Ridge opened up. Is that about right? I mean, the construction started before then, but when did it actually open? Give or take a year?
Yeah.
While that place was under construction, I can't recall the amount of units, but there was a number that was shared that on average you would see 1.5 calls per unit per year, some sort of average that was anticipated to increase the call volume. Has there been any follow-up on that now that that facility's been open for at least 4 or 5 years to see how close that average is? And I know that's a little different type of facility than what's being constructed downtown and.
Sure.
But, I mean, is there any analysis on that to see if that number is true or if that's just, maybe it's really low, maybe it's high? I mean, is there any follow-up on that?
I haven't, but it would be fairly easy to get those numbers. Again, within our own system for response, it would be something that would be easily pulled out if needed to do it year by year.
Well, I'll wrap things up. I appreciate the time, and my intent in asking these questions is just so we have a thorough understanding of this program. I guess my last question is more for the finance director. Do we have a firm grasp on the actual cost of this program? the first responder program and then this weekend shift, what is that costing the city on an annual basis? If you don't have the numbers, I just thought, because I've asked that question in the past and haven't got any. I mean,
No, Councilmember Thorson, we do have some information, actually. The fire chief actually put together some numbers that do tie out to the budget.
okay.
So, again, keeping it within the budget that was given to me for our part-time staff, we'll start first, I guess, with the three-person initial duty crew, which is basically, again, Saturday and Sunday for 12 hours, every Saturday and Sunday throughout the year, for 3 persons. And the total cost of that is $56,160. The EMS duty shift from home, again, this is for staffing 2 people to be on call and respond to those EMS calls and fire calls additionally back to the station. Again, it's more of an hourly base because Saturday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and then the weeks, the days during the week. So basically, the way the hours figured out was 5,460 hours, and I threw in $78,405 to cover the 2-person EMS duty shift from home. Then it was trying to figure out the cost of the fire calls, as it turns out, and the average response time in that as well, along which last year was 277 calls, so doing an average turnout of what we're seeing of 10 to 12 people for those types of calls basically came out to 41,550. The part-time code compliance positions come out of that as well, and basically for 2 positions that are 24 hours a week throughout the entire year for both of those is 46,500. So that's a piece of the overall budget as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Mayor and Council, if I could just quickly add, having been on a lot of these calls with fire in my previous time at the county, I know how draining they are on resources, and the quicker you can get more resources on any of these critical scenes, the chances of anyone surviving increase. So I would firmly support this, knowing that the only stat that really matters is 1. If you save one person's life by adding these resources and allowing them to respond in time, that's really the only stat that is important. That's it.
And I feel for you, Jason, in regards to the 5 that didn't make it, because it's wearing on everybody, especially the first responders that have to react to that. And I've got that personally in my life, and it's very hard, and it takes a lot of toll on the individuals that are responding. So
I appreciate that, and like I said, and I think it's just knowing that you're doing your best, and when you're not doing your best, and that can make it more difficult as well. So I appreciate that.
Okay, any other questions for Chief Mallinger? If not, the question is for the add back fire and code enforcement part-time wages. That's the question that we're asking here, and this would reinstate initial duty on weekends from 8 hours to 12 hours. Councilmember Cole, any thoughts?
No, I fully support, support both police and fire and feel that it's need be. To touch on a point, one is, one life worth $18,000, yes. I think it's a service that the city needs to provide. The only question or clarification that I had was, I got confused through some of the conversation, 3-person versus 2-person, and at the station versus on call. What percentage of the time do you need 3 people versus 2? I'm just trying to spread the dollars out a little bit further from a clarification standpoint, but you've got my support regardless. But I just had some questions on what type of call requires a 3-person call versus a 2. That was.
Yeah, very good question. I'm sorry it didn't come across clear like that.
It's me, I just got lost.
As Scott Thorson he's been in the system, so he understands it. But the 2-person EMS duty crew shift from home, those individuals, again, they'll take an EMS rig, one of our SUVs, home, and they respond. Their sole duty is to respond to EMS calls. So there could be one, typically there's 2 on that just handle EMS calls. If a fire call or something additionally come in, everybody is responding to the station. If it's a cardiac arrest, those first responders are going directly to the scene. If it's any type of a medical, just that 2-person crew from the fire department is responding, no other individuals. The 3-person initial duty crew that's on the weekend, Saturdays and Sundays, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., there are 3 firefighters here that respond to the majority of all the calls. And whether they're EMS, fire alarms, motor vehicle accidents, car fires, those types of things, they respond immediately to the scene to handle those. The only time we tone out additional staff to respond to backfill the station is when it's a larger event, such as a structure fire. So, and in that case, the crew would also be immediately responding from the station to that structure fire while we still have people backfilling as well. Does that clarify it a little?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Wong?
Thank you for answering all those questions, Chief Melander. For the increase in calls, it makes sense from my perspective to invest, that small amount. I think that the impact is worth it. It's a bang for our buck in that regard. So I would be okay with increasing those part-time wages for this. I think one thing that would be helpful in terms of data for future consideration is kind of along the lines of some of the questions that Councilmember Thorson had, and that would be, how many of these calls, if Lakeview is taking a 30% increase, how much of that is being absorbed into the fire? And, those kind of justification questions really would help me make a clearer decision. But I think you answered the questions that I had. So thank you.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, I'm in favor. I'm a big firm believer of public safety, both police and fire. And I think it's nominal. When I called 911, I had a sick husband there for a while, and they showed up. And any time of night. And there were some weekends that we had to call. So from a personal level, but I think that the money would be well spent, and I think our residents would be well served. So I'm 100% in favor of it.
Councilmember Thorson?
Yeah, and just to recap, I mean, I'm not poised to answer yes or no on this question until I have a chance to hear police department, and I think I've got some questions for them too, and how it ties into our response as it relates to the medical calls. But I guess my concern here is that we're using discretion when we respond to fire calls and what resources we use, but we're not when it comes to medical. And to me, that just doesn't make sense, because you can make the same arguments in response to fire type calls that you can in medical, that you don't know showing up to a house that, you know, the windows are foggy, or, you know, it could be a full fire, you know. So if you're gonna follow that logic, you should apply it equally across everything you do. And in this, it just seems like this has morphed into something that initially it served a purpose, and now it doesn't. In a sense that, you know, sure, this is a nice service to offer. And if we had unlimited resources, again, we'd be having a full-time department, but we have needs across the city. These things cost money, and they're difficult decisions to make. I sure hope that this isn't being interpreted as me being anti-fire department or not supportive of public safety. You know, if we're here to ask questions, that's our role as council members. We're elected to represent the residents and the taxpayers of this community, and part of that is to ask questions, and sometimes they are interpreted differently by different people. But I sure hope by no means that this is being construed upon as me being anti-fire or anti-public safety. It's just questioning how we're responding and how we're utilizing our resources, because what we're being asked right now is, do you want to give $18,720 to the fire department? I'd be completely for that if it meant raises to each and every member. We could use that money for additional training. We could use it all sorts of different ways, but we're choosing to do it through this first responder program, which, you know, I think, you know, we owe it to ourselves to have a further firm understanding of what's going on, and when it comes to medical response, our partnership with Lakeview. I know in the past that question was basically asked, do you guys support this program? Well, a huge shocker, it was yes. I mean, who are you going to offer two assistants to at no cost? And they're going to turn that down? Obviously, it's a benefit to the firefighters to have more patient contacts. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have any medical emergencies, right? But that's not the world we live in. And, you know, I just think that at this stage, it's pretty obvious that the council supports it, and that's fine. But I think as this continues on, I sure hope we can still evaluate this program just like any other program we would evaluate that we offer, and make sure that this is the right use of our resources. And that's what I'm questioning here. It's certainly not questioning you and your department in the work that they do. As someone who did it for 10 and a half years, I have full understanding of it. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think, you know, I welcome your questions. I think that they're really informative. And, you know, I think one thing that I see as a valuable conversation for us to have is, you know, we don't have finite resources. I think we all know that. It's just, you know, how much are we investing where? Y'all are there as a responder, first responders. You're there, you're responding at every call. How can we find also solutions to prevent people from even getting to you is also going to be really critical for us as a community, because what do they say? An ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. I believe that, and I also think economically it's going to be really important for us to think in the long term, how do we create less stress, less calls, the need for response. I think that's something we're going to really need to have a conversation about as well, because everyone's going to continue being taxed unless, or emotionally, work taxed if we don't nip it in the bud, I guess, in the beginning. So I think we need to focus on some of that prevention as well.
Okay. So I think, Finance Director, you have, I think we're in favor of the 18,720 for the part-time wages for the fire. So, thank you, Chief Manager. I think, that we're under good hands. Thank you.
Yes, Mayor, I also want to echo that. I think Chief Mellinger did an excellent job in answering those questions. I'm actually excited by the dialogue that's taking place today because what it shows to me is that our residents actually have a city council that cares. And we're actually looking, beneath the surface and trying to find out better ways of maybe doing something that we've done for a while. I think it shows the great leadership that we have in our chief too, because was able to give excellent responses to everything. But moving on, the next item that we have to discuss is to change a part-time community development position to a full-time. And I will turn that over to give a little bit of an explanation on that to our interim city manager, Frandl.
And Brian, I was going to say, you might need a microphone and talk loud.
I need to repeat that? Yes, please. The next item on the up for discussion with the city council is to change the community development position from a part-time to a full-time position. And I'll turn that over to our interim city manager, Frandl.
Thank you, Dan. So I have spoken with a couple of the other ladies in the office over on the finance or the community development side. And they have said that there has been work that has not been able to be gotten to. We have 2.5 FTEs on that side. Like I said before, we did have a community development director at one point. We also had a parks coordinator, I guess you could say, at one time as well. So they're lacking those two positions. Those job duties were spread out between these other office help, and they're getting the permits processed like they should, but they're not. It's been hard to keep up with the filing and keeping things straight the way they need to be. We have an employee that has taken on actually all of the commissions that she sits on, which is a lot to ask of one person to sit in on those meetings and also, prepare all the minutes and have that for all the commissions. So that pretty much takes up most of her time. Besides that, she answers the phone, she helps with the front desk. So that leaves 1.5 personnel to be doing the rest of the permitting and trying to keep up with the filing. I just feel, and in talking to those employees, that it would be appropriate to make the half-time employee that we have a full-time employee. After talking with Dan today and looking at the numbers, it came down to, was it 30,000 approximately for that position. That would make that full-time and also make that a benefits employee. It is a minimal amount, but I do have to throw out there too, I know you guys are looking at the new city manager and how he will want to structure that department, and especially if you're thinking about an assistant to that position, which I don't know that would happen right away. Next year, that would be looked at towards the end of the year or even into 2023. But I know the workload could certainly use that extra half-time employee to bump that half-time up to a full-time employee. So I'll just throw that out there and let you guys think about that. I think it would be helpful for the department.
Any questions for interim manager Frandl in regards to that position? If not, the question is for the change in community development position from part-time to full-time, and I'll go to Councilmember Cole.
I fully support the move from a part-time position to a full-time position. I recognize that staff's got a lot of things on their plate, and extra, extra people around would help dramatically, so I fully support it.
Councilmember Wong?
Yeah, I've seen, staff work very hard and in a lot of transitions, and I support, moving that to full-time. I think that would be a great benefit to our city.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with it. There's a lot of work down there. I come in on a regular basis. No one's fooling around down there on both sides. I mean, they're working. I fully support it.
Councilmember Thorson?
And is this individual who's currently working part-time, they are the one who will become the full-time?
That's correct, Councilman Thorson.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a need there if, this department at one point had 4.5 people, and, we've had to make some reductions and, for various reasons, and now we're coming out of difficult times, and if this is what's recommended to help with those things that aren't getting done, I'm supportive of that.
And I see it quite a bit down there too. There's a lot of work being done down there, and I hate to say it, but things are getting, I think, a little overloaded for them. And I sense the stress, and I sense they are missing things at times too. So, Finance Director, looks like that would be a yes for that one also.
Okay, so right now we're at approximately a 4.1% levy increase over the 2021. We have one last item that has a direct levy impact. We've kind of given two different options. The overall cost impact of adding a police sergeant to give a 24/7 supervisory for the police force would be approximately $138,000. We've given two options to look at. One, delaying the start of that increase of that position to June 1st. The impact would be approximately, $81,000. If you were to do it at the beginning of the year of 2022, it would be the full $138,000 impact. I am going to turn it over to our new police chief. We've had some exciting times in the last couple of weeks since his arrival. So I'll let him kind of explain his thought process and how he's seeing the development of the department and the needs.
Welcome, Chief. I did notice some gray hairs that I didn't see 2 weeks ago, so yeah.
You're growing quick, I'll tell you. I'm really happy to be here and have the chance to speak with you all on the request for an additional sergeant. And I don't like to be in a position of being the new person in the room and asking to have a bunch of money spent on a new position, but I really think we're in a moment of the need is there. Just looking at our staffing levels and just to break down what they are. So we have 17 sworn on paper right now, 3 currently out on work-related medicals, me as the chief, 1 investigator, 1 SRO at North High School, 3 sergeants, and that leaves 8 patrol officers. So in order to, our current staffing shift schedule is a 24/7 coverage to our community, and that's done so in 12-hour shifts with 4 days on and 4 days off by each crew. The current 8 patrol officers that respond to emergency calls are working at pretty dangerously low staffing levels. So there's 2 officers on each shift with 4 days on. When the other crew is off, they're on and back and forth on night and days. So there's 2 officers on. 75% of the time, there's 1 sergeant working with them. So 25% of the time, there's only 2 officers on without a sergeant. And then if you throw in vacation or sick days, that number goes up even more, where there's really only 2 people patrolling the entire city. And without a sergeant, if it's a sergeant that's off. So the biggest problem is really just the lack of supervision, and that's not, that I do not have trust in the work and professionalism of the officers here. Everyone is a phenomenal cop, and I'm quickly learning that. But it really is just we have a younger staff, and people have questions, and goofy things come up in this line of work, and you look to the supervisor to direct you on how to respond to the calls that you're sent to. So, and in my current breakdown, I'm taxing each sergeant with additional administrative responsibilities. So with such as body cameras, training, post-mandated tracking. We're currently doing a policy overhaul, switching to Lexipol policy manual. The average completion time for that is 1 to 2 years, so that's not going to be a quick process, and it's very time consuming. Another sergeant oversees investigations, and then constant equipment maintenance. And this isn't done by, I see the sergeant role as their primary responsibility is to ensure the safety of the community and assist the patrol officers, which they are doing. They are actively going on emergency calls out of necessity because, for example, if you have a DWI arrest, that is going to usually take 2 officers to help in the immediate arrest. Then it's going to tie up 1 officer for 6 to more hours. So that leaves, at a large percent of the time, 1 patrol officer to ensure the safety and respond to any other calls that come up. If there's a domestic call that comes up, I hate being in the situation of having a staffing plan that would expect 1 patrol officer to respond to a domestic call by themselves. It's not safe for them, and it's really not safe for the community at that point. It's just the uncertainties of those types of calls. It puts everyone at a greater risk because the officer's not able to provide the help to potentially more than 1 injured person, and it's not a good model to send 1 cop to a scene like that. And then you throw in accidents and medicals that we talked about that are very resource draining. We need more on the street. Right now, I'm just asking for 1 more sergeant, so we have that round-the-clock coverage. So our officers can go to that sergeant as the leader of the crew when they have questions to help guide them and provide the best type of emergency service that we can as a police department. Take last night, for example, we had a terrible shooting. Unfortunately, no one was injured, but with 2 officers on, they're tied up pretty much the rest of that. I mean, that's a large scene to try to process, to try to find all the evidence there, initially to try to catch the shooter, which then brings in other agencies, thankfully, who were willing to help. But going through the proper steps on those types of calls, a lot of times you're going to look for the supervisor for guidance on how you should best handle that scene in order to make sure you're preserving all the evidence and you're going about handling the call to the best of your ability. But that's more difficult if you don't have a sergeant to say, hey, I've been here before. This is how we do this. So right now, just the amount of times that we don't have a sergeant on the board helping respond to calls was a bit alarming for me in my first couple weeks here. And then you throw in, the additional tasks that I'm already assigning them, a lot of times would go to, and many other agencies have a lieutenant or a captain or a chief deputy. When I interviewed for this position, they asked me why I thought I was better than other candidates, and I told them that I would outwork them, and I'm going to try to live up to that. And I'm not requesting the lieutenant or a chief deputy or that number 2 position that is common in almost every metro department. You know, with that, assuming more responsibilities, but also learning what I can ask the sergeants to help me complete on the administrative side. But the immediate need to preserve the safety and increase safety and with resources on responding to these emergency calls is getting another supervisor on the board all the time. So we can increase our resources that are responding to these calls. And then if you throw in, we talked about that 2018 staffing study done by the Fitch and Associates company, which I was not aware about until week 2 maybe, but read that. So at that time in 2018, when that was done, there was 18 sworn officers on the department. We currently have 17. They recommended back then that we add 2 additional officers and also recommended that we have a minimum of 4 patrol sergeants. So we haven't done that yet. And right now I'm only asking us to get back to the same number that we had in 2018 when they recommended 2 additional. So just getting us back to where they already saw was a shortage of police officers in this department. And then you throw in just wellness. You know, right now it's pretty difficult for officers in a very stressful job to get a day off of work. And when they do get a day off of work, they know that they're shorting their coworkers by not being there for them. So then that brings on the sense of guilt because you're not there, and then now they're running even more thin than they already are. Without proper staffing, we're taxing our people even more than they already are with everything going on in this profession. You know, I met with the whole group, and my initial message was just kind of goals and objectives related, and my first one is I told them I wanted to make this department the best place to work for, and a lot of that is tied to the ability to have a good work-life balance, and proper staffing allows us to do that. So if we don't have the staffing to allow people to take a day off, then that work-life balance is out of whack. So I think the sergeant in the immediate is the best way to ensure we have proper leadership and guidance on the street at all times, with the benefit of the community in mind with that. And it also, it's just given our officers a chance to take a break and utilize their vacation hours. And that goes a long way just towards the overall wellness. And in addition, you know, we can hire 3 officers right now. We had 7 applicants for that. We're fighting among other agencies for the same applicant pool. When I was first hired 12-ish years ago, there was 400 to 500 applicants for one position in this job, and now we're fighting against our neighboring agencies for the same almost obsolete pool of potential police officers. And these new hires, they're going to go to agencies that have safe staffing levels, so they know that they're not going to join a department and then never get a day off. They're going to go to a department that has equipment that helps keep them safe, and that's in the form of, you know, those other things that I think you all received a write-up about. Those will help us compete with the other agencies that are already there when it comes to squad computers and handheld radios and a records management system that you know that's happening, that we don't really have a way around that one. But we're trying to get the best people, and fortunately we have some great people in this department, and that is really what is you know, the face of our agency, and they do a phenomenal job. And I hope to add to that, because people are everything when it's responding to emergencies and you know, working in schools and building relationships. you want to get the best people in this line of work for doing those things. And, you know, when the applicant numbers are that low, it's tough. But it all factors together with, you know, how many people we have on the streets. And, you know, we just lost one to the county, so that doesn't help. And I know 5 years ago when I was at the county, we lost 5 or 6 at the same time. So things like that hurt a department. But, you know, we're in a great place right now with who we have in our staff, and I hope to add to that. What would help me is getting another sergeant on the board as soon as possible to do everything that I just talked about, really, wellness and safety and vacation days, and helps with, retaining who we have so far. People are getting burned out. Any questions that I can help?
Any questions for the chief? Councilmember Thorson.
I yield to Scott.
Well, I guess it's been frustrating for me as a council member on my time on trying to follow the staffing level on the police department, because it seems as though we've always been consistent in budgeting 18 positions, and that's a combination of patrol officers, the chief, at the time a captain, 4 sergeants, and CSOs that would come and go. I don't know if they played into that. I don't think they did, along with the staff, the clerical staff. And to me, it's simple. It's how many officers do we need to safely patrol the city? And for whatever reason, you know, people come, they leave North St. Paul. Obviously, in the past was kind of a stepping stone to officers to start their career. We had a lot of individuals start their careers as reserve officers. We would hire them, and then they move on to larger departments, because larger departments, such as Ramsey County, as you're well aware of, offer those advancement opportunities. Whereas we just don't have that because of our size and constraints in our budget. You know, just like in an ideal world, we'd have a full-time fire department. In an ideal world, we would have a chief, an assistant chief, 2 lieutenants, 3 captains, 5 or 6 sergeants, and, you know, 10 to 12 or more patrol officers. But we just, you know, I think a city that size is like Roseville or larger, I don't know if that's how their exact makeup is, but we just don't, again, have the resources, so we have to operate within our means. And to me, what residents care deeply and mostly about is seeing officers out patrolling and hearing that we potentially have 1 or no officers available to respond, that they're tied up with calls, is very concerning. And to me, especially nowadays in the current climate that we're in, with increasing crime everywhere, and it seems to me like maybe we should be looking more at, are we adequately staffed at the patrol level before we look to add more supervisors. Now, I agree that at the time that study was done, we had 4 sergeants, and we eliminated a captain's position, which was also in their recommendation. So I don't see how, you know, we never did eliminate a sergeant's position from the budgeting. I know that individual retired, and I can't answer to why that position was never filled. And that's what adds to this frustration, that there's just this, it seems like there's been this moving target for the staffing level and how many people we have. And so, you know, I guess I would just like to know, how many patrol officers do we currently have? How many do we need? And if we're under, we need to look to fill those positions first before we go to do it. But I get what you're saying too, that those may be hard to fill if we don't have adequate supervision. But to me, the question isn't that we need to add a sergeant's position. We've had that budgeted for years. We've operated with 4 sergeants for many years. I don't understand why we're down to 3 and why that was never backfilled.
And I don't know that backstory either, having week 3 on the job now, but yeah, we only have 3 right now, and I wasn't gonna wait until next year to ask for more officers. I was just going for the sergeant immediately, but if we're bringing it up, seriously, with the increase in population and the development, there's absolutely gonna be a need for more officers. There's no doubt about it. With more people in town, the calls for service are gonna increase, and then the demands on officers are also gonna increase. And them being tied up on one call or another is gonna mean less staff to respond to other calls, and they typically all arrive at the same time. It's,
In these sergeants, they are working positions. They're not administrative positions, correct, where they would be here in the city hall. And I mean, obviously, there's paperwork involved with calls, so naturally, patrol officers and everyone has designated time to being here, filling out paperwork versus out actively patrolling. But that's the intent of all of these positions, is to be out actively patrolling, correct?
100%, yeah. The sergeants take calls every single day. I was out on a call yesterday because the sergeant was on a call, tied up, and then we had a call that required 2 officers, and there was no one else on, so I got to go out cruising around, which was kind of fun, but not typical. I don't know of too many chiefs that are out responding to calls, but I enjoy doing that. But if it's out of necessity, based on it, just there's no one else to go, that's a different story. But yeah, right now our sergeants are basically patrol officers, because they go to all the calls with our patrol officers.
And assuming this position, everyone's okay with it and it gets approved, is that gonna, I mean, there's protocols that we need to follow because these are all union positions. And from my understanding, the position needs to be posted internally first. And if whoever applies, there's a hiring process. And if for whatever reason we don't promote within internally, then it's opened up to outside hiring, correct?
I'm not 100%, but I would absolutely support an internal posting for
So
sergeant.
assuming and again, I'm not trying to make promises here because obviously we haven't done anything, but just going along that assumption that someone is promoted internally, that then is going to open up
Another,
a budgeted position, so we don't need to come forward and say, well, we need to add another police officer now because we just promoted, officer so-and-so to sergeant, correct?
correct.
Okay, because that's where I think has been some of the struggle where, again, there's this moving target on how many sworn officers do we have, and so, I personally would like to see increased patrol officers. If we're short, if that's what we're being told, if this position is going to be functioning in that way. I mean, obviously, it's a higher pay scale and it's got additional supervisory positions, but to my knowledge, we were already operating with budgeted 4 sergeants. The recommendation from the study was that the administrative sergeant revert back to a patrol sergeant and be actively in the street. So if that somehow got removed from the budget, that's new to me. But I'm fully supportive of this. But I have a couple other questions here as it pertains to public safety and the budget for you. If I can have a little more time, I know we're getting a little long here in the tooth, but I think it ties into the discussion that we were having with the police department, and response times are key to any emergency, whether it be a domestic situation or a medical full arrest, what have you. And given the fact that Lakeview ambulance for the most part is stationed here 24/7, they have a one-up on any firefighter that responding. And in normal circumstances, our police patrol officers are out actively patrolling. They are the first ones on scene, correct? In most cases. I know we're asking you a question here that you probably don't know.
I'm not 100% on
Offhand.
it, no.
But I think that's an answer we can get by looking at dispatch times. And when a call comes in, they check in that they're responding, and then they're supposed to check in when they're on scene. Now, I know all the time that doesn't happen. And I know sometimes they accidentally check in on scene when they're en route, so they put them on scene within a second, which is, unless they're actually there at the time of the call, is impossible. But the point I'm trying to make here is that if we acknowledge that time is of the essence and that it doesn't matter who responds, why aren't our police officers trained in medical, offered that at least? I understand that in the public safety study addressed this, how, people become police officers because they want to be police officers. They want to deal with the typical duties that come with policing. Firefighters become firefighters because they want to fight fires. Paramedics become paramedics because they want to treat people medically. But, we'd be fooling ourselves to ignore the fact that there's a huge crossover here with all these things, especially given the fact the way we respond. I mean, we don't have a policy that says our police department does not respond to medical calls. They respond if they're available. If they're obviously on a call and they can't respond, they don't. There's times where police call on the fire department for assistance and backup, especially if there's like a potential for SWAT to be involved and potential for the use of flashbangs or incendiary devices where potential there could be fire. So there, it doesn't happen very often, but there's crossover there. And so my question is, and I've asked this of our previous chief, and I don't think it's changed, but correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is to become a police officer, initially you go through your training, you receive first responder level training, correct? That's the minimum.
Correct,
To be a licensed officer.
correct.
After you're hired, it's up to the department in their policy on whether or not that level is maintained or a higher level such as EMT. I'm not aware of departments that require a higher level than that, other than there are fire medic, police medic positions in cities like Woodbury and I think Burnsville, or it's just minimum CPR training. What do we do here in North St. Paul? After we hire an officer, what's required of them to maintain their medical training?
And I don't know that history, but I would firmly support additional emergency medical training for any future officer and all of our current officers. Like you mentioned, cops are usually the first ones on scene. I did that all the time. We would take pride in getting to medicals as quickly as possible and beating the other responding teams. And, that, like I mentioned earlier, that leads to saving lives if you can get there as fast as possible. And cops are in the position to do that a lot, as you mentioned, because we're out patrolling the streets. Having our officers properly trained so when they get there, they can do that. But the scenes are where sometimes you're able to use your medical training skills, and in other scenes you have to use your more traditional police officer skills because it's a chaotic scene and there's a lot going on, and you need to free up room to allow the fire or EMTs to do the life-saving things. But I firmly support more training in any capacity, especially medical training.
Sure.
I think it just adds another level of safety to our citizens.
Absolutely.
It just increases that amount of response to a call, whether it's a police officer, whether it's, firemen, or whether it's EMT or whatever. I think the more levels that you have, the more success that we might be able to have in that situation.
Absolutely.
And along with that, though, I mean, I acknowledge, I mean, honestly, I was the type that wanted to fight the fires and not do the medical. I did get my EMT training just out of the necessity that we were more engaged in that medical stuff, but it's certainly not something I enjoyed, and I'm sure there's certain police officers that maybe feel the same way, that, hey, I like chasing the bad guys and slapping the cuffs on them. I don't want to be doing chest compressions, but you have to acknowledge that there's the crossover there. And I guess my concern is, in your opinion, if we were to require, let's just say, EMT level training for all our police officers, do you think that would make things more difficult in retaining our current pool of officers and hiring future officers, or?
I don't. I think officers are usually eager to engage in any type of training. You mentioned, losing some folks to bigger agencies for advancement opportunities, but I also think a big part of that is just job opportunity and career differentiation. They go to bigger agencies because they can do different things. If we can bring those things to our smaller agency, we have a better chance of keeping people here. So that involves training and any other way that we can switch things up, so it's not just, well, your options are patrol or patrol. If we can do, we have one investigator. I'd love to get us a drone eventually, because that's a huge safety increase. So with that comes training a pilot on somebody how to fly the drone. Maybe getting a canine officer eventually. Just doing different things that we can do as a smaller agency to allow our officers to do some of the things that bigger agencies offer goes a long ways to keep them here, and then we're not losing. So, and with that training and additional medical training, absolutely, I don't think that is a deterrent to work here. I think it would be a benefit.
And same with the CSO positions. I know, we were asked to approve an additional CSO. I believe our current one, did she leave? Is she gone now? Okay, so now we're down to 0.
Correct.
But we've been approved and budgeted for 2.
Correct.
And I could have swore at some point we had 3. And that was a recommendation because of the complimentary services that they provide to our patrol officers, that they don't get bogged down and tied up with, say, your example of a DUI. After they pull you over and do everything, someone's got to haul you down to the drunk tank, and usually that's the arresting officer.
Correct. Yeah, I mean,
Or in this case, if a CSO is there, that's something that they're allowed to do?
yes.
Okay, so it potentially could, and in that scenario, tie up a police officer for an extended period of time where they're not able to respond to a call or a medical emergency, whereas a CSO could fill that void if we had more of them. You're saying the sergeant, we're lacking coverage, supervisory coverage, or we're lacking CSO coverage as well, of that additional person to be there to help provide assistance to our officers, so we're not taking away from that, correct? And likewise, if an officer ends up jumping in an ambulance on a medical call, which has happened, that's taking away from them being able to respond. So
Correct.
is that CSO position, do you see that potentially a need for that to grow, and then potentially some crossover there where those positions could also be receiving first responder EMT training and kind of helping fill this void of, or, not a void, but the staffing issues that the fire department's trying to address, and, in my opinion, maybe the need to get away from the way we're currently delivering it and partnering more with the police department, which would cost more money. So that's where, this conversation is coming full circle. I wasn't proposing that we eliminate money from the fire and leave it at that. It's utilizing our resources more effectively, providing this training to our existing officers, potentially hiring more officers, training them at a higher level, so we have that. If the police are gonna be the first ones on scene, why aren't they trained at first responder EMT level, I guess is my question. And if we go down that route, it's gonna cost more money, but it's providing a higher level of service, and that in a sense eliminates the need to have all this additional fire staff doing that. Now, I know that might not sound like something the fire department wants to deal with, but I'm looking at it from what's the best way to deliver services. We've said it here before, we don't care who shows up, what uniform they're on. All that matters is that they're trained and they know what they're doing and they get there quickly and they can provide help. And to me, it seems like the majority of the time, it's the PD that shows up first. Maybe Lakeview and fire is right on their heels, but prove me wrong, show me the data that shows that that's not the case. I mean, 2018 stuff is dated now, but I think we haven't seen these drastic changes in our community where if the call volume increases, the percentages are gonna kind of stay the same. So that's what I'm proposing. I know we're not gonna solve this tonight. I'm thankful that you both were here answering my questions. I hope they weren't interpreted as being, attacking public safety or anything like that. It's just, I think we need to take a serious look at the struggles that we're having with recruiting firefighters, keeping them engaged and here. This first responder program may help, but maybe there's other things that are more effective that we look at. And along with the difficulties, as you've pointed out, in hiring police officers now, especially given the current environment that we're facing. And, how do we work together and collaborate and maybe look at delivering services a little differently than we traditionally have? So I know the question was, add the police sergeant. I mean, we've been kind of delaying these types of discussions. I'm glad we can have a night where we're not faced with, another topic or someone else waiting. So thank you for indulging in my lengthy questioning, but I just wanted to get this out there on the record and hope that we can look at that in the future. Not this current year, but maybe next year, especially after we have a city manager who can kind of dial in on this stuff. So my answer is yes, I support a sergeant's position.
Okay, the question is add a police sergeant effective 6/1 or add a police sergeant effective 1/1. And I guess I'll go to the 1/1 because that would determine whether or not it'd be 6/1 So it'd be the start of the year to the end of the year of next year. Otherwise, it'd be start of June of next year, but it sounds like the need is now is what you're requesting.
Correct.
So I will go to Councilmember Cole in regards to effective 1/1/22. Your thought on that?
I support the need for the additional police sergeant effective 1/1, but I do have a couple questions.
Sure.
And again, it all goes back to a lot of what Councilmember Thorson brought up from a staffing standpoint, from a patrol officer standpoint. So you've got 3 people out on medical.
Correct.
Are they all 3 going to be returning, or is there one that will be medically retired out?
I am not sure on the status of them
Okay.
right now.
I guess I was under the impression that we're probably going to lose one of the 3, wasn't going to be able to return for some injuries that may have taken place that would remove them from being able to return. So, again, just want to make sure we're properly staffed from a patrol officer standpoint too, and
Sure.
making a leap, assuming that the sergeant position will be backfilled within. Now you're down 4, so. Just wanted to, make sure that we're moving in the right direction to get those other positions backfilled.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely plan on posting it internally, so that would then reduce patrol officers by another one. Hopefully, in our current hiring process, we can get a high-quality candidate group and start them as soon as possible. And yeah, I'm not too sure on the status of our officers out on injury right now. And I thank you for allowing the hiring process for officers to begin, given that outstanding uncertainty. Because, as I mentioned before, the need is there for officers and that sergeant. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
My question is overtime. Will this kind of reduce the amount of overtime that is being done right now?
Yes, absolutely. Because like I mentioned, I don't sleep well at night if I know that there's minimal staffing on the board. It's not safe for them. It's not safe for the community. So with more staffing, we don't have to backfill when there is only two. I don't have to try to ask people to come in and be that third, either officer or the one sergeant, third overall. Yes, it would reduce overtime.
Good. Councilmember Wong.
Yeah, can you kind of speak to about how much of that overtime is allocated to a supervisor versus, a patrol officer or some other role?
I guess I'm not 100% sure on the question. So if a sergeant takes the day off, I'm going to try to fill that spot with another sergeant. So then that would be sergeant's overtime. If a patrol officer takes the day off, I'm going to try to fill that with a patrol officer on their sergeant or on their officer overtime scale.
So given that we've had quite a bit of overtime this past, several months and whatnot, about how much of that is attributed to a supervisor versus another role? Like, because we are short in other roles like CSO and all that, how much of that is attributed to the need for a supervisor? Does that
So that they just go without a sergeant. Like, that's built into the schedule right now. There's just, if a sergeant's not on, that usually goes unfilled. So, which, then I guess I'll try to fill it with another officer to get that number up to 3, even knowing it's just a patrol officer and not that hard striped leader on the board. But another officer and either sergeant is better than less when it comes to the safety of the community and each other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And can you speak a little bit to so we've talked about the need and what type of calls. It'd be a little bit more helpful for me to kind of understand the nature of what most of the calls are, say the top 3 to 5 calls. And I think maybe to Councilmember Thorson's point and potentially how do we work a little bit better together but also to be efficient and effective. So what type of calls are they? It sounds like a lot of medical calls are becoming more common. What are other calls that are becoming more common, and are they best suited for CSO or other roles?
Yeah, CSOs never get dispatched to calls, ever. I don't think any agency operates that way. Just looking at our recent monthly stats, DUIs, theft, medicals were the top 3 from call types. So yes, we're seeing more, persons in crisis calls. That's not in the top. I don't even know if it's in the top 10. A lot of assists of citizens. Couple weapon type calls, disorderly conduct, some traffic offenses, kind of round out the top 5. So all calls that police officers are the appropriate responding team. And, you know, you brought up CSOs earlier, that CSOs are great, mostly for, it gives the agency a view at CSOs likely are interested in pursuing law enforcement as a career. It is a great way for any agency to vet that employee with the likelihood that if they go the licensed peace officer route, we have someone who's been working with the team for however the length of time that they've been there, they've been getting some type of training. That is a fantastic way to build an internal candidate pool. I'm likely going to task them with evidence room assignments in the immediate as soon as we get them on the board, because that's another thing that our officers are tasked with. So yes, they do help occasionally in transports. That's a very small sliver of time saving for an average patrol officer, and it's helpful, no doubt. But there's other things that we could be utilizing our CSOs for the greater benefit of the whole department.
Sure, yeah, it just kind of helps me to understand, you know, what proportion of calls are going to which and where the demand actually is driving. It sounds like obviously there is a need for a sergeant. My concern is, well, obviously the budget, once we look at what, starting a sergeant in January, we will have a new city manager at that time as well. But to also consider with that I believe puts us over the average levy increase in the county at 6.6.
Councilmember Wong, that is correct. The average is 5.87 to 6.44. Yep.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of a little bit where my concern is raising the levy too much. You know, we're coming down from 9 and then 6, so with the new city manager coming on board, I would feel a little bit more comfortable supporting it at least later on. And I just still have some lingering questions about, you know, the demand of how, you know, calls are being handled, and just some needing of understanding, I think, there.
I'd love to offer any more insight on, you know, just if the questions are related to like what the sergeant does every shift or how they assist on calls. I'm just not, I'm a little confused on the question
that
about
would
the
be
sergeant role.
helpful. And then, you know, again, I am a little, to Councilmember Thorson's point about if this was already previously budgeted, there is another request. Is this a separate request? Does that make sense?
It's a finance director.
If you will give me a moment, I was actually before looking at and going back to 2017 with FTEs to kind of dispel that a little bit.
If you don't mind, I'm going to take a quick 1-minute break. Great idea. Why don't we go ahead and take a 3-minute break?
And I know, Lisa, after we had that public safety study, it was recommended that the council get regular updates, and then the city as ourselves look at that
We'll wait for Brian, or we won't wait for Brian. He went to the bathroom real quick, it looked like. So if you got her answer, Councilmember Wong's kind of,
Well, I think the question that was out there, and it had come up previously too, was kind of looking at that complement for the police department. So as you can see, and I put this together based on past records, from 2017, you know, there's always been a police chief. You can see where the police captain was all the way through until the 2021 budget. Sergeants have always been at 3.
Can you make that bigger by chance?
Oh, sure.
I mean,
Hopefully I can.
well,
I can see it perfectly fine.
my eyes are only 38 years old, and I can't see that.
binoculars. Don't print it.
Landscape.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I could get.
I think there's a zoom.
Plus sign.
Lower right corner?
He's trying to do that.
Lower right
What?
corner.
Ron, you know how to do that?
Probably better than I do.
As I was coming out of my mouth, I should probably be quiet.
Okay, so sergeant has been budgeted at 3 since 2017 at the very least.
Yes, correct. And then police officers in 2017, 18, and 19 were at 12, and then 13 from 2021 and in the current 22 budget.
Is the reason the sergeant is at 3 because during the day, maybe the captain would have filled that position, or, I don't know. I'm just thinking, why 3 when 4, you need 4, because it was probably the captain's position that might have covered that.
Yeah, a captain might have covered the day shift. I'm not sure how the structure and the schedule was in the past, but I mean, that's a possibility, that they had the captain kind of acting as the day shift sergeant, helping out, respond to some calls, but I'm not certain.
But it kind of makes sense that he might be available during the day to cover those.
Absolutely,
For the
yeah.
3. And now we don't have that captain's position, so there's even,
Correct. So I respond to calls occasionally.
so now we got the chief responding, so. Councilmember Wong. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you for answering that question.
Absolutely. I hope I answered it, or the question.
Yeah, I suppose for me, starting in January, given our circumstances, having it go above the average is a concern of mine. And then the fact that we do have a new city manager coming on board as well, who may have some thoughts about what things are going to look like. And then even if we do add the position starting in June, it puts us at 5.61, and the average is what, 5.7, you said?
It's in a range of 5.87 to 6.44, so we would be, you know, a little bit underneath the average.
Within.
Yeah, so we're yeah. So I, as a finance director, I'm just going to throw out a suggestion here as we're going through this, and And part of it is it's a timing of different, things that are moving on forth. So, and I'll give you two perspectives. One, currently we're out for 3 vacancies of police officers. If they were filled tomorrow, could you promote into a sergeant and could you get through to June? Knowing that you're going to get another FTE in June of 2022.
I mean, yeah, the answer is yes, we absolutely could. We've been running thin for quite a long time. Does it put us in the place where I think we need to be? No. But could we make it? Yeah. Does that, add? Does it reduce the stress and keep people here as much as I think would adding a sergeant on January 1st would do to alleviate a lot of the staffing problems? Waiting until June 1st doesn't do that in my mind. Due to the immediacy, yes, the adding of 3 will help. Do I believe we're going to get 3? Definitely not out of the immediate pool, just based on our applicant numbers. So that I don't, we won't have the benefit of 3 anytime soon. It'll take another process. I mean, you got Roseville offering $5,000 signing bonuses and front-loaded vacation, and I'm guessing their applicant pools are higher than ours. So
Let me ask you this, so the 6.66 had put us a little bit above the average, but from last year, how many of those cities had a 0% levy?
Mayor, of those cities that are listed there, 2 additional cities, Maplewood, and they're at 5, and St. Paul, and they're at 6.9.
Well, higher, at a 0% levy, those 2 had
They
0%?
had last year,
And the other
or
ones?
this year.
And the other ones had a levy increase?
Had a levy
Last
increase.
year.
And no, you actually, you make a very valid point. And so when we're looking at this, that we're comparing ourselves to an average of the majority of them having a levy increase in 2021 and having, pretty close to what we're at right now for the 2022. Us being a little bit higher isn't necessarily out of ordinary onto that. And, and then I'm not trying to be non-sympathetic to the taxpayer, but you really are getting a lot for this budget. I mean, there's already been some changes. There's an additional CSO. This would be an additional police sergeant. Increase in compensation in a number of positions. We've added a public works director. And so, we really have added quite a bit for the ability of delivering services, differently. And remember, this is your maximum levy at this point. So even if we were to go with that and do a 6.7, increasing it to 1.1, you still have time to bring that down. And my second option or suggestion, and actually it was part of the conversation very early on, and Council Member Wong, you had brought up, it really would be beneficial to have a workshop. Either individually or together with the fire and code enforcement and the police department. And really what a lot of your questions that you were doing tonight, which it really does excite me, because it's nice to see that the elected officials are really taking care and concern and watching over the city. The questions that you're asking are really trying to get a better understanding of how we're providing our services today, and then challenging us as staff. Is there better ways to do it? And that's really the bottom line. And I'm very impressed with our leadership here on the staff side, because I think they've responded very well. So To me, where we're at right now, I think I wouldn't go with that maximum 6.7. Part of the reason for that, in my recommendation, is that we were at 0 last year. We're a little bit above where the average is, but again, there's only 2 other cities that were at that 0 that make up that percentage. In addition, we will have a city manager coming in towards the end of this year, which may have some additional needs in the city. And the good news is that we have prepared with some of the, you see what the impact is on this refunding bond, which will approve the issuance coming up here in next Tuesday. But in addition, at the end of the year, we're going to do a refunding bond, which is going to allow us to do some additional work in CIP, some road construction work. And in addition, in 2023, because of our rate increasing and because of us shifting from a market value levy to a net tax capacity, we should receive more fiscal disparity, which will put us in a little bit better position in the next year for the levy. So,
Councilmember Thorson.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we have other options here too, and I was gonna propose that as an idea that, challenge to staff, can you find other areas that will include this stuff but still bring us in under that average or that around that 4.6? And, I know we like to stay away from using things like this pandemic fund and we want to reserve them for one-time things, but seems like we're pretty close. And especially given the fact that you said we have the potential to have an increase in the fiscal disparities next year, that gives us room to use some of this money that ideally we use for one-time expenses for this year to keep the levy down, knowing that next year it's going to even out. Or things that, aren't personnel related that, we're working towards, but obviously aren't, like if we were to evaluate the amount of money that we're allocating towards the equipment fund and out of the general fund from each department, or certain expenses like that maybe we can ratchet back, and collectively that'll help us reduce things. I think you know what I'm talking about from the accounting perspective. If there's positions here that we feel we want to include, but we also want to be below a certain level, I think there's all sorts of options we can get to that. We just have to be willing to acknowledge that it may take a little longer to reach those goals of building those funds up by doing so.
Yep. Councilmember Peterson.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence here. I like what Councilmember Long was saying. With the new city manager, he's got to have some work to do when he gets here. And he might have a whole different vision. I do sympathize with the police department, however, with that adding another sergeant, kind of in a quandary. I guess I'm going to wait till June, I think, on that position. That's how I'm going to go. And I do like the idea that Councilman Thorson said about those CARE Acts. Maybe it's time to utilize that. Because a year ago, remember we sat here and we said we're not going to have a huge levy because it's 0 now. And I mean, we didn't want to bump it to 10%. We wanted to, obviously, we gave those citizens a good feeling about it. And now I think we're kind of like ratcheting it up a little higher than I want to go. But that's all I have.
Yep. So it sounds like, Councilmember Thorson, I'm assuming what you said at the beginning, was you are in favor of doing the police.
Yeah, I'm in favor of the whole entire thing starting 1/1. I'm not necessarily in favor of this, the part-time wages with the fire department, because that,
But we've already.
so
we've
that's
already talked
that's where I'm saying there's other ways to get to there. So, yeah, I'm in full support of the sergeant's position. starting 1/1.
And then Councilmember Cole, you were in favor of that, and I'm also in favor of the 1/1. But if we can, direction is if there's any more we can do to reduce that levy, the council would like to see that, but I think all of us are in favor of what is presented here in regards to your recommendations, except for the remove the downtown beautification. Does that sound fair?
What do you mean by that, except by, I thought there was consensus that we remove that.
That's what I mean. There's consent, we're all in favor of what's here except for the downtown beautification.
But they're proposing to remove it.
Correct. That's right.
So you're saying you're against it? but-
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's where I'm-
Take the 25,000 out, yes,
Okay.
yes.
And so when we talk about the pandemic funds, last week when we were talking about with the three items that are down below, the indirect levy impact, we had replace, the police record management system that's going to become obsolete at the end of this year. That's kind of really where we identified the pandemic funds to be used as those one-time funds. And just making sure that that I didn't misinterpret something. And then the police squad computers, we're looking at the utilization of forfeiture funds. And then handheld radios utilizing the CIP vehicle and equipment funds for that, and that's rightfully so for where they're at. Just a kind of a quick piece, and if we can, because it is 7:45, there were some outstanding questions regarding the handhelds. And because our fire chief, Jason, is here, he's a little bit more familiar with the whole system itself. And when we're looking at this $110,000, I do believe it's, correct me if I'm wrong, police chief, that I think they're like $5,500 a unit.
Correct, yeah, $5,500 a piece, and it's under state contract pricing, so there's no discount, unfortunately, for bulk orders.
You're not in sales, are you? You got to
I
really
am
work
not,
them.
I am not in sales. That's a tough number, I get it, but yeah, it's,
And I do believe the number that's been in the CIP has been 20 units for each of the departments, the police and the fire. I know that was a question, Councilmember Thorson, dating back to the RNC at that point in time when it went over to 800 megahertz. But the counts that we're having is a total of 40, 20 on police side, 20 on the fire and enforcement side to it.
And is that recommended by each chief? Because I think that was a question that it came out of a fund when it was first purchased, what do you call it, a grant. And we got as many as we could, and, is that how many you literally need at this?
So you are correct. When we first purchased all of the radios that we had, we additionally obtained a grant with the help of Ramsey County that provided radios for the entire police department and every member of the fire department. Additionally, we had radios that were part of that group that we were able to utilize and give to Public Works and some of our electric staff, I believe, as well. So at that time, we had utilization across the city. As these radios have aged and gone obsolete, as they tend with most technology, and once they become end of life, you're unable to repair them. And we've begun within the fire department pulling them back from every firefighter having them to making sure that they're with the officers on the fire department and on the trucks as needed for those calls. And it's been difficult to maintain the correct radios because we have 3 different types currently. making sure that PD has the same type of radio across the board for all their police officers, so that there isn't a communication error that could cost them. So as things have died off, we have been in a bad situation for a while, especially for the PD, just because of the type of radio that they use, wanting to keep them in the same specific model versus what we will use in the fire service. But hopefully that answered.
No,
No?
20 units per,
Correct.
do you need, is that the need, is 20 units? Because back when you got them as a grant and you got as many as you could,
Right.
is the use, are you using all 20 at a,
Yes, so for us, again, I'm going to be replacing a minimum of 3 units on our trucks, so the 3 fire trucks, and that allows, when we have full crews on the trucks, 2 officers and an engineer to have a radio, along with staffing our officers. I should say that our chief officers and our lieutenants and our captains to have one with them at all times as well for additional calls, just in the aspect of the reason we put radios on the trucks as well is because we don't always know who's responding. We don't know if we're always getting that lieutenant or that officer, but that is the recommendation.
20 units?
Yeah.
And you need 20 units.
20 is good for the police side. Yeah, we're definitely not having any backups with 20, but 20 would give us each a radio and the CSOs.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I think that was the question that we had back. Any other questions for the chiefs or Ron, Public Works, Councilmember
Just
Thorson,
a quick question for Finance Director.
or Finance Director?
So we got kind of budgeted figure here for the replacement of the record management system for the police department, and that 150 to 200. I'm assuming this has a useful life of, because it's software related. Is 7 years stretching it? Is it 10? Is it 5? What's the lifespan expected for this software upgrade system? Does anyone know?
I don't have a solid answer for you. I know that the system that we would be going to is the same system that almost every other agency has currently, that doesn't have the same soon-to-be non-existent record system that we currently have. And I think built in that number is the regular updates and maintenance, and I'd say 7 years would be not out of the question at all, and I would expect more than that for the life.
So why are we taking the stance that we need to budget this and pay for it all in 1 year? Why wouldn't that be spread out over its expected useful life and then money pulled from the budget each year? I mean, I know, I understand initially we have to pay for the whole thing up front, but from a budgetary standpoint, why aren't we spreading that out over the life of, or the anticipated life of this system? So, I mean, do you,
Councilmember Thorson, if this was included in our CIP plan, that's what would be happening. And that's why there's been an extreme need to develop a comprehensive capital improvement plan. This item is not even on our plan. This is something that came up actually at the time that we met the new chief. So somehow, somewhere, there was documentation that was never forwarded to anybody, included in any capital plans. So this is an immediate need, and as it being immediate need, we can't even wait till the 2022 budget, and so we were identifying some one-time funds that are available now. This would still require a city council action to actually appropriate these funds for this. So that's kind of how we got to there with this. But yes, in the future, it would be included in the CIP plan, and we would be building money to handle that at the time. Yep.
That be all software that we work with, OpenGov? I mean, is it, are those
In-
things that are,
In time.
would
I mean,
also be included in some sort of,
Absolutely. It needs to be a total comprehensive, and the first draft that's going to be coming for the approval next Tuesday still has a lot of work to do. I'm not going to say it's rock solid, and it's something that needs to be reviewed periodically for priorities, cost changes, useful life, and so forth. But normally a software system is usually in the range of anywhere, usually averages about 10 years is what you usually use it on a financial or for a useful life on a bigger system. Any computer equipment usually in the range of 3 to 5 years. Is usually what you use for a useful life. But yes, that's the plan. And that's just something that really hasn't been done at the city level. And that's why this is kind of like the first draft, and it's been composed with all the help of the department heads. And obviously, you've seen that we have new department heads. So new information is coming all the time, and that. But to get back to that question, that is the plan, that we would be accumulating funds to be able to replace it, and it would not have that levy impact of going way up. Fortunately, we have the pandemic funds available that we could actually purchase that.
And that's where I'm saying, if the goal is to include all these things that's in front of us, but also to stay under that 4.67%, why can't we move this record management system into the capital improvement plan and then, budget that over a span of 7 years, that's where the money comes from, and that frees up, whatever that balance is, the 162. We're not using that all up, and then we can utilize that for this sergeant's position now and accomplish that goal as just one example of something else we can do with the budget, and it's not just what's laid out in front of us. You
Right,
follow
so,
where-
yeah, so let me address it a little bit differently. So those 3 items that are down on the bottom are not having a levy impact. They're not a part of that 6.7 that you're at
Okay.
right now. However, I'll simplify what you're suggesting. You could transfer from any fund that you have to offset and drop down that 6.7. The issue with that is that you're kicking the can, I always call it, you're kicking the can down the road. And so to me, it's really, if you want to take a look at these items that are here and prioritize those, when we went through them item by item, the majority of the city council approved each one of the items, so we're at the 6.7. I understand that we would like to get it down further. Off the top of my head, I don't have a lot of other ideas. I came up, working with the rest of the finance department, particularly Kyle, and we had come up with a number of different things that we've had in the motion. I had it down to 3.2 before we started going back up. But these are needs. These are needs of the city, and I think we need to look at it, and it's unfortunate, but I think a 6.7 is truly a reasonable maximum levy at this point in time. We still have time, and I think that there's some good suggestions that have been out there. I think that we still have time to have some workshops here in the fall, and maybe find some ways to trim that 6.7 down.
anything else for any of the panel?
You just need a couple hours.
Yeah, Rod, do you have any input at all? Do you want to say anything, or I know you didn't say a whole lot, or we weren't recognizing you as much
No,
tonight, so,
I think, where I'm at now, we're pretty good.
okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for the time tonight, and the council. We got a lot accomplished tonight, I believe. And we do, like you say, we still will have work ahead of us, and we'll schedule some workshops and see where we can go from there. So Again, everyone, thank you, and if there's nothing else, a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilmember Peterson,
Second?
second by Councilmember Cole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You're adjourned.